friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Amelia, and today I want to talk a little bit about book rating. So I've been rating books on this channel for about just over a year now, and then since I started reading again a couple of years ago, and I've never had like a system for my ratings. It's always just been like, I read the book and I'm like, I think about it for a minute. I'm like, oh, that was like a 3-star book or like a 4-star book, you know? But all those ratings have been to some extent kind of arbitrary. Like they're not based on a system, as I said. So it's just like I read the book and it's like, I'll try to consider stuff like plot and character, but they're not like specifically weighted evenly. So it's a little bit more difficult to have a consistent, like my books aren't specifically rated consistently. And I've run into that a lot now when I'll have a book and I know it's better than a book that I read, say, a year ago, but I gave that book 4 stars or something, and that's what I may want to give the book that I just finished, but I'm like, no, this is definitely better than that book. So do I change that rating, or do I give this book a higher rating, even if that would place it above some stuff that I think it's not better than, if that makes sense. So I wanted to devise a more standardized system that I could rate everything that I read on this channel based on, so that it would make sense to me and also make more sense to you, so that if you, for example, are a really plot-heavy, plot-driven reader, then you would see that reflected in my rating, like whether or not the plot was really good or the plot was really bad, and choose books based on that, as well as, you know, whatever I have to say about it, if that makes sense to you. So for example, if I gave something full points for character, you really like character driven books, you know, that might be something that you're interested in. Does that make sense? I hope it does. So without further ado, let's sort of get into my plan for this system. So I've created what I'm calling the 5 Ps rating system, and let me just look up for a second what my what names I ended up giving these, because some of them I was like, ooh, I gotta like, this is what I want it to be, but I gotta work it into the P's, you know? All right, so the 5 points, and then we'll sort of go into each of them a little bit, although they're relatively self-explanatory. 1, the first point is plot, 2 is prose, 3 is people, 4 is peripherals, and 5 is pleasure. So let's go into each of those categories, and then at the end, we're gonna rate a couple of books so that you can see how I might use this. Okay, I realized I forgot to say how this is gonna work. So each of the 5 is like weighted worth 1 star. So each of these things to me is like worth an equal thing, an equal amount in the rating system. However, I am potentially going to be flexible to the weighting of these if a book is like, one element is more important than the others to that book, and each category is going to be worth 1 star, and then that star will be divided into the 4 points. So a quarter, a half. Okay, my brain just left the building. So a quarter, a half, 0.75, and the whole star, and then you would add up the amount at the end to see how close it got to the full 5 stars. I don't know if I explained that well, but I'm hoping that it will make sense when I rate a couple of books with you. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about plot. Pretty sure we all know what plot means. It's a pretty integral part of books. You know, what the heck happens in the book? What are we doing? What's the whole shebang about? So I am pretty open to like a wide range of plot types. And by that I just mean like the style mostly. So like a slow moving plot versus a fast moving plot, something that's more action packed, or something that's sort of slower, more vibey. So it's not specifically going to be like based on those attributes. It's just like whether or not it was well executed. In my opinion, of course, all book ratings, all that kind of stuff is going to be completely opinion based. That's kind of just how art works. So yeah, for me, this is 100% about execution. And so, for example, if you have a slow moving plot, that's fine. Is it worth it? Am I entertained? Because even if something is slower moving, I can still be entertained because we're learning about the characters or the world building or something that makes it justified to take like 200 pages to get the book moving. Does that make sense? And then for a fast moving plot, obviously it's going to be like, do we still get those quieter moments where we can connect more with the characters and sort of, you just like, when you have something that is fast moving, you need breathers in there so that otherwise it gets very overwhelming or stops to have meaning, I guess, to some extent. Like if it's everything's action, then the stakes are constantly going up and the climax might not be as exciting because all of this was exciting, if you know what I mean. But yeah, that is kind of the main thing I need to say about plot, is that it's all about execution here. Whatever style you're going for, is it good? All right, and then after plot, we have prose. So this is, of course, the writing. And I'm also open to like a range of writing styles, from the more descriptive and flowery end to the more sort of utilitarian end. And it's also somewhat similar to plot, where it's about execution for a lot of the point. But I will say that I think I prefer writing that's a little more descriptive than the more sort of sparse type. It just, I feel like, is more immersive, I guess I would say. But for the most part, this is just going to be like, do I feel like you're conveying what you're trying to convey properly? Like, am I getting what you're putting down, you know? Am I understanding the mood of the scene, the vibe? Is the dialogue good? That's one that's going to be under prose and not under character, because it's like the actual writing there that is like the problem, not specifically the characterization. It's like the writing of the dialogue. So is the dialogue good? Do your scenes convey the setting and the mood? And yeah, is your sentence structure good? Obviously is an important one. But yeah, just those are the kind of basic things I feel like you look for in a writing. Like, is it enjoyable to read, and is it functional? Those are kind of the two main pillars, I suppose you would say. But I think that's kind of all I have to say about prose. So let's move on to number 3, which was people. Now, people is, of course, characterization within the story. And I will say that for me personally, I prefer books that have more in-depth character work than ones that are less in depth, I guess is the only way to say that. So I love a good long fantasy where we really get to sink into the character, and I like it when we get into their head and understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And I like it when they have certain amounts of flaws, but I want those flaws to make sense for the character. So like, does their past and who they are now impact what their flaws are in a way that makes sense? Like, do those things mesh together? And doesn't just feel like the writer was like, oh, I need to give this character a flaw because characters need to have flaws. It's like, no, does this flaw make sense for the character, and does it actively impact what they do and what they say in a realistic way? So yeah, that is kind of the main thing for character. All right, category 4, here's where we started to get a little bit, I had to work a little bit to make it fit into the P's thing. So this category is called peripherals. And since I mostly read fantasy, this is primarily world building and magic systems, although you could say that is part of the world building. But if I was reading something else, so for example, like a romance, it could be like, is the actual romance part good? And you could say like setting would go under this as well, because that's kind of like the world building of that type of book, even if it's set in the real world, so that world is already built, but you're still building the sort of niche area where your story is taking place in, if that makes sense. But world building is another one of those things like characterization where I love a good in-depth world building. I just like to, it's just so interesting to me, all the different worlds that we can create and the unique features that authors add to their worlds. So for example, I quite enjoy Brandon Sanderson because he has a more unique take on world building than some of the other stuff I've read, and he tends to also go a little bit more in depth with that, which is something that I really enjoy. But I also think that a lighter style of world building can be really well done if it's, as like I said before, executed really well. Like, am I intrigued by the world? You don't have to tell me every single thing about the world or about how it works, but if I'm intrigued by the vision, then that can be enough for me to really enjoy the world building, even if I'm just like, ooh, I still don't quite understand how this works, or like these people I don't quite understand. Like, that can be fine, because authors don't have time always to take me into every microcosm of the world that they've built. So like, even in my own writing, I have more notes on world building than are like appearing so far in my manuscript, because it's just like they don't necessarily always matter to the story. So that's going to be another element that is also important, is like, are they adding world building for the sake of world building, or is it important to the story? And additionally, how are they getting the world building across? Is it just like an info dump, which can be fine if, again, it's executed well, or is it sort of learn as you go type of vibe? Like, here's a little bit of information, and then later we learn something else. I like both of those styles. Like I said before, it's all about the execution. I think I'm sounding like a broken record at this point, but a lot of things in a book that you think you might not like, you might end up liking if they're done really well. So that is peripherals. And then the final category is pleasure. And this one is just like pure subjective enjoyment. Like, what did I like the vibes of the book? Was it, as I said, enjoyable? Just, that's pretty much simply it. Like, did I have a good time? It could be that the characterization or something in a book sucked, but like, it was still a vibe. I feel like characterization was kind of maybe a bad choice for that one, because that's something that I really like in a book. But maybe, so say for example, The Night Circus. The plot wasn't like a bad plot, but there was also like very little plot. And so the whole enjoyment of the book came from like the vibes. So that's an instance where I may have potentially adjust the weighting. So the vibe of that book is more important to the reading experience than the plot. So maybe the plot would only be worth half a star. But yeah, that's kind of it for that category. Did I have a good time? Did I feel pulled to come back to the book? Once I started reading it, was I like sucked in, wanted to just keep reading? How hard was it for me to put the book down? All those kind of factors are going to be in this final category. So those are the 5 categories. Now I have 2 books that I've read recently that I have not yet rated. So we're going to rate them together so that we can kind of test out this system together. You can kind of see how it works. And yeah, let's get straight into that. Alright, so the first book I have for us to rate together is Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. This is a book that I really enjoyed, so I think we're going to be on the higher end of the rating scale. But let's go through this. So the first point is plot. I think the plot is probably one of the strengths of this book, just because it's on the more action-packed side. We have less of those small moments, but we do get them, which is something that I like about it, because you need those moments to connect with the characters and also to kind of digest the big things that have been happening. I feel like I'm going to give it a full star for the plot, just because I don't really have any notes. I think it was well executed. I think it was a good time. The second point is prose. This is one of those books that is more on the functional side for the prose. It's less of the sort of flowery, more descriptive type of stuff, and more like, I don't really know how to describe it other than functional. Like, it's kind of more stripped back. I think it's a good execution of the stripped back prose, but as I said, I do prefer a little bit more sort of descriptive type stuff, but that would slow down the pace of this book and the plot. So it's hard to kind of isolate these things a little bit, because they are all intertwined in the end, and one thing will impact the other. But I think I would give it maybe 0.75. And then people, I like the characters in this book. I think that I like that their motivations make sense for what they do and with their backstories. I had a couple things I would like a little bit more, just like a little bit more in depth from the characters. I think we don't have a lot of time, like, because it's very action-packed, we don't spend a lot of time just like in our characters' heads, and we do have that to some degree, but I could ask for a little bit more. And I would also like to see more female characters, especially ones that get a POV. I think I'm going to give it 0.5 for now, but I'm considering changing it. but we'll stick with that. That's 50%, that's pretty good. All right, and then peripherals, so a world building and stuff. I think the world building in this book is good, but in some aspects it's a little bit surface level and I could ask for a little bit more. I think that the world building is probably a 0.75 though, because like I said before, it only has to be as in depth as to serve the story. So I think it's relatively well matched to the story. And then the final category is pleasure, so vibes and enjoyment. And I'm gonna give this one a full point for that. I just enjoyed myself the whole way through and always wanted to come back to it. And I was very tempted to buy the next one immediately after I finished it, which I think is always a good sign. Okay, based on my comment about like the world building and stuff serving the plot and that kind of thing, I think I am actually going to upgrade the characters to 0.75. So that brings us up to a rating of 4.25 stars, which I think is pretty accurate to my experience of reading the book. I think probably if I had rated this without my system, I might have gone for 4.5, and that might be one of the instances where maybe I would need to change the weighting, but I think I'm gonna sit with 4.25, see how it feels. All right, next we have The Dragon's Legacy. I finished this yesterday. This is a book I have like never seen talked about, but it was honestly a banger. So let's go through and rate this now. So first of all, plot. I really enjoyed the plot in this one. It's a little bit, I think that this book is a slightly more plot driven than character driven, but because the plot is very interesting, you know, kind of balances out a bit. So I think I'm going to give it a full star for the plot. And then prose, this one is more of my preferred prose style. We have a little bit more description and a little bit more just like, I don't know, it feels more in depth with the prose. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but it's a little more flowery, a little more descriptive, as I said, and it really helps to create the atmosphere in this book, which is one of the more unique things about it because it's based mostly in a desert. So I think I would definitely give the prose a full star on this one. All right, people. I think people is probably the only spot where this flags a tiny bit. I really enjoyed the people. I'm just trying to decide if I got into their heads enough, because there are quite a few POVs and they're all kind of following this main plot line. So we're all just getting kind of different perspectives of this main thing, which I think was executed really well. But I just, in some aspects, I may have wanted more. But on the other hand, I just think that the characters made a lot of sense for their pasts and were each so interesting and had their own motivations. I think I'm gonna go with a full star for the characters too. All right, and then next up is peripherals. I already know I'm giving this book a full star for that because I just really enjoyed the world building. As I said, we have like a desert society, and then there are also like a couple other groups, and the world just feels very full and rich. And even though we don't know everything about all of the cultures yet, I feel like we're gonna get more. And I really like what we've gotten so far. The Zira culture is so interesting, and yeah, I just kind of have no complaints about it. So a full star for that as well. And then finally we have pleasure, and I am giving this one a full star as well because I just enjoyed myself from beginning to end. I was never bored. I kept wanting to come back to this book. And yeah, so that gives us 5 stars for this book, which I am super excited about. It's been a little bit, has it? No, I had a 5-star last month, but I've really toned down the amount of 5 stars I've been giving out. And this book honestly deserves every star. So I know you probably haven't heard of it before, or maybe you have, I don't know. But I highly recommend that you check this one out if you're big into fantasy. It has got complex world building, really interesting characters, and lots of different kinds of magic and all that fun stuff to sink your teeth into. So yeah, I give this one a try. And then this one also really good as well, but this is not a review video. So I hope me rating these with you has helped you understand this rating system, and I'm going to be using it to rate all of my books going forward, so there will hopefully be some more standardization and things will make more sense in relation to how how I rated them compared to other things. But yeah, that is all that I have time for today. So let me know in the comments what you think of my rating system, if you're going to use it yourself. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.